Okay, we are right at the top of the hour, so we're going to go on and get started. First, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time to join us today and welcome you to our PCI Readiness series. Today, we will be covering Requirement 12, which is the final requirement in the DSS, and we will be talking about maintaining a policy that addresses information security. So just a few housekeeping things before we dive into the requirement. This session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slide deck following the presentation. All attendees will remain muted throughout the session, but we highly encourage you to answer any questions that you have using the Q&A feature, which is located on the WebEx toolbar. I will be monitoring those throughout the presentation, and we will have some time reserved at the end to answer those. Just to give you a little bit of background about who we are at Kirkpatrick Price, in case this is your first time joining us on one of our webinars. We are a PCI Qualified Security Assessor and licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to clients worldwide. Our firm has over 11 years of experience in information security by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer both regulatory compliance as well as information security services. We provide consulting services such as policy and procedure, drafting and review, risk assessment services, internal audit plan and development, and readiness audits. We also provide guidance and audit services on frameworks such as PCI DSS, SSA 16, SOC 2, FSMA, HIPAA, and ISO 27001. I want to take a quick moment before I hand it over to Jeff to invite you to connect with us. You can subscribe to our blog there for any, we're constantly posting industry updates and tips and best practices, so it's a really great way to find some free educational information. And we also keep a library of all of our pre-recorded webinars that are located on our website. And connect with us on LinkedIn. It's another great way to stay in touch with us and stay in the loop with what's going on in your industry. So at this time, I'd like to hand it over to Jeff. Jeff Wilder has over 15 years of experience in information security. Prior to joining Kirkpatrick Price, Jeff was a trainer for the PCI Security Standards Council, where he was responsible for educating individuals who were working towards becoming qualified security assessors. In his role of Director of PCI Services at KP, Jeff is responsible for all aspects of PCI services. Jeff holds several industry certifications, including he is a Qualified Security Assessor, CISSP, ISSAP, ISSNP, and CISA. So welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I just want to take a little bit of time and thanks, Sarah, for hosting this here. You're doing a great job. I appreciate that very much. And today we're going to be spending about an hour together here and talking about Requirement 12 within the PCI DSS. There are some additional annexes that will continue on after we're finished with Requirement 12, and we're going to spend a little bit of time here at the end talking about the next presentations. So for those of you that are not intimately involved with PCI DSS, the PCI DSS and the Payment Card Industry Council and the standards that they manage were put together by the payment brands to help organizations keep the bad guys out of your cardholder data, right? And effectively, it develops a minimum set of standards that you're required to implement within your environment. If you store, process, transmit cardholder data, right, these particular controls that we've been talking about, you're subject to them and required to apply them as needed. Let's go ahead and move forward. So the PCI DSS applies to, as we just kind of mentioned, anybody that stores, process, transmits cardholder data. And if you are a service provider, we know there's a lot of organizations out there that might have the ability to somehow impact the security of somebody else's cardholder data. Perhaps, they provide it for you for some type of processing, or, perhaps even if you manage somebody else's router where cardholder data is flowing through that, you would be a service provider. Okay, so the PCI DSS applies to anybody that effectively could impact the security of the cardholder data environment. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. So in the current version of the PCI DSS, there's about 394 controls. Within that, where there's 394 controls, that's lock, stock, and barrel, all of them. Now, in some situations, all of those particular controls are not going to be, you're not going to be subject to them because they just may not specifically apply. There's about 1,500 individual tests that are performed during a PCI-DS assessment. So you can see it's quite the undertaking to not just to implement it, but to go through the assessment and to be found compliant. Individually, there's 6 control objectives and 12 areas that we're going to be we've been talking about, and as I've said, we've now come to requirement 12. So let's go ahead and move forward. So we've spent a good deal of time over the last year. We started at requirement 1, which was really around hardening your networks. Requirement 2 was focused on hardening your operating systems and hardening your applications. Requirement 3 was focused on making sure that where you have cardholder data, whether it be a physical kind of falls into requirement 9, but you're expected to protect it. So requirement 3 really focuses on the encryption of cardholder data at rest. Requirement 4 really focuses on the transmission of that cardholder data over open or public networks and making sure that it's appropriately protected. We get to requirement 5. Requirement 5 was having some type of antivirus solution. Requirement 6 was about the secure management of applications. So we need to patch, we need to develop secure software, we have change control. Now, requirement 7 and 8 are kind of hand in hand. Requirement 7 was really focused on authorizing individuals to get access to the cardholder data, and requirement number 8 was the authentication. We got to requirement 9 that focused on physical security. 10 was all of the logging, right, and NTP. Requirement 10, if you remember, was a really big domain. A lot of organizations really struggle there. Requirement 11 was about testing the efficacy of your program and making sure that those things that you as an organization believe are in place and are functioning the way that they're designed. And now we come to the last requirement themselves. While it is the last requirement, there's a couple of annexes that we will be talking about. Requirement 12 is the policies and procedures around your information security program, and I'll go into that in a few details later. But one of the things that I wanted to just bring to your attention is that each one of these particular domains, as you see through here, 1 through 11, are up on our portal where they can be downloaded and viewed offline. So I encourage you to take an opportunity, if you've missed one of these sessions, to take an opportunity to go view those, or if you have any specific questions about them, at the end of the presentation, my email address is made available to you, and I would encourage you to please use that as you feel necessary to get a hold of me to answer any questions that you might have. So let's go ahead and move forward. So there's several ways as an organization that you can attest to your compliance, and the first one is a self-assessment questionnaire, right? And this basically varies depending on how you interact with cardholder data. And there's 4 basic versions that there's several variances within them. The other assessment is by a QSA, such as an organization as Kirkpatrick Price, and somebody such as myself as a QSA assessor would come into your environment and test those things. And understand that in most cases that the PCI DSS is a contractual obligation that you have between yourself and the card brands, between yourself and your acquiring bank, or perhaps between you and an organization if you're interacting with their cardholder data. However, there are some states where there is some legal requirement for you to maintain PCI DSS compliance. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. So one of the most important things that you do as part of maintaining your environment is fully understanding the scope, right? And effectively, if the control applies to your environment, it needs to be applied. So when we talk about, like in requirement 6, there's requirements in there around secure software development. If you're not developing software, you know, those things just aren't applicable to you. But if it's in scope and the control is applicable to you, then you need to apply that. But understand the most important thing that you do as an organization is maintain and understand the scope of your environment, because if you don't know where something's at, how do you expect to protect it? Right. So let's go ahead and move along. So the scope of the cardholder data is, while the PCI DSS is very centric, right, and very specific, it covers, when you look at a lot of the controls, a lot of the things that we look at are around technology. But understand that the PCI DSS is not just about technology. There are people and there are processes, right? The technology is just a tool that's facilitated through a process that are managed by people. And as part of your organization's responsibility is we need to make sure that we have the appropriate policies and procedures and standards that really cover all of those things that are inclusive of the PCI DSS. Right, and we have just a little bit of a presentation. In terms of the policy, there's only one requirement up in requirement 12 that says make sure your policies are in place. We'll get to that in a moment. Right, so people, process, technologies, those systems that are connected to, an understanding that in order for you to say that something is out of scope, that means that there is literally no connectivity, right? If there's any connectivity between your systems that store, process, and transmit and another system, those other systems would be considered in scope as well, right? So one of the things that we encourage you to do is, as an organization, is if you have the ability to implement some type of segmentation, right, as a means to reduce those systems that can impact the cardholder data environment, that's a really good thing to do to help to limit your risk. But it also helps to control the size of your assessment too, right? Rather than looking at 5 servers, you know, where something's segmented, you know, the assessor might have to look at 20 or 30, right? So it's a really good means and method to segment your environment to help to control risk. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. So here we come to requirement 6, and requirement 12. Requirement 12 is titled as maintaining a policy that addresses information security policy for all personnel. And I want to emphasize the word all, right? This is not just your IT administrators. This is anybody within your organization, right, that would be involved in some capacity with storing, processing, and transmitting cardholder data. It might be the receptionist taking credit card data for making a reservation. It might be the cashier person, right, that takes a credit card for payment for your services or your goods. This is also the administration staff, the people that are involved in the daily care and feeding. So we have to ensure that we have policies that address all of the necessary security provisions within the PCI DSS for all personnel. Okay, so I want to go ahead and let's move forward. Really, the focus of requirement 12 is about the governance of your program. It's the oversight. This is the management of your program, right? That when we look at requirement 12, these are really the technical the management requirements as it relates to managing the people, processes, and technology. Okay, so when we look at requirement 12, it's about the governance, managing the governance and the oversight of your organization. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. Requirement 12.1. Right, requirement 12.1 is really kind of plain and simple, right? It says that you need to keep a current set of policies and they need to be accessible to all relevant personnel. So the question then becomes is, well what's relevant, right? Who's relevant personnel? What does that mean? And it really comes down to is that if you have staff that are involved in the store, process, and transmit of cardholder data, and this would include third parties that are in your, in your organization, staffing augmentation, perhaps even vendors, right? these individuals in these companies that have the ability to impact your cardholder data need to understand how to operate those systems, those environments, and interact with those systems, those processes, the people, in order to ensure that the daily care and feeding and the security of that cardholder data is maintained on a day-to-day basis, right? So really, when we look at a policy, I want to talk about what a policy actually is. Actually, let's go ahead and move forward, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. All right, so I'm going to come back to that other conversation in just a moment. Requirement 12.2 says that you have to perform an annual risk assessment, right? And the event of that activity provide the organization with a formal analysis of risk, right? What are those things that could negatively impact us? Who are the threat actors? What are the risks? What are our vulnerabilities? Right, and you execute some type of risk ranking around those things. And at the end of that process, you're left with, a list of assets, a list of processes, a list of procedures, and things that you need to remediate within your organization to address the risk to an acceptable level. So really, the foundation of your information security program is this document and this process right here, 12.2. Because what happens is you take the output from your risk assessment, right? And you look at your policies and you say, do we have a policy that addresses this risk? Right? If you do not, then you would be required to develop a policy then that addresses those risks. But then you have to ask, okay, are the policies that we currently have, do they address the level of risk that's imposed into this environment? And if the answer is no, then you would look to amend the policies that you currently have to address the level of risk that's imposed by those items, okay? So understand that risk assessment being the foundation of your security program, and we have another hook. I'm going to talk about this in a minute again here and a few controls in a few minutes. But understand that the foundation of your information security program is your risk assessment. You perform that risk assessment annually. Then you take that, the output of that, then you take that and review your policies. You ask the organization, you look at your risks and say, well, we have these risks. Do our policies address those risks? Right, and that is where we're required then for the 12.1 to perform an annual risk or an annual review of our policies. Right, you don't have to update your policies annually. You only have to update them if they don't address the risk, okay? So we're going to be performing this risk assessment at least annually, and then additionally we're going to be performing this risk assessment when the business objectives change, right? So as a given example, if you go out and you buy a new business unit, right, you might want to perform a risk assessment then because your risk posture, right, within the environment has changed, right? If you onboard a new third-party organization that is going to manage all of your IT assets, right, that might be something that we need to perform a risk assessment about, okay? So understand you need to perform a risk assessment at least annually and when those business objectives within your environment change. All right, Sarah, if we can go ahead and move forward. Requirement 12.3. So we have all of these assets in our environment, right? And we've worked really hard to secure them, right? And we've worked really hard to keep the bad guys out. And so 12.3 requires that we develop usage policies for all of those critical assets so that your staff understand how to operate those systems, right? So we have policies and procedures. So I want to really quickly talk about what is a policy and what is a procedure, right? Is the policy the document that you have in the binder that sits up on your shelf? No, the piece of paper in the binder, that's just the medium by which it's communicated. The policy is an executive level document that defines how your organization is to be run. Right? That's the intent of a policy. So a policy defines how the organization is to be operated, and then the procedures are then developed as a means for how are we going to address those specific policy requirements. So we have to have policies for all of our critical technologies, right? And really the question is that if I compromise this asset, or if I pull this asset out of your your information flow or your process flow, will it break your process, right? Will it break things? And if the answer is yes, or if this asset could lead to a compromise of the cardholder data, right, then that's kind of a critical technology. So we need to develop specific technologies that address, the approval of those things. As a given example, you don't want somebody coming in, from home and bringing their own home router that might have wireless enabled on it and allow connectivity into your network, right? We want to communicate to our staff how to use these technologies, right, and the authentication for them, right? We want to make sure that people know what's expected to be used. As a given example, we look at this last piece here, acceptable use. There was an audit I performed several years ago, and I come into the organization, and there's a requirement around the badging system needs to be secured. And the receptionist had the badging system on her desktop. And as I got to auditing, I come to realize that she was using this badging system for her personal desktop. Well, that in itself isn't really so bad, but I asked her, what do you do when you don't have anything to do and you're waiting for the phone call or you're waiting for people to come in and, before you greet them? And she says, well, I typically will surf Facebook and play my Facebook games. I don't know if playing Facebook games on on your production system that's used to control access into your data center is really a good use of that asset, right? So we want to define what's acceptable uses for those technologies. And once again, those things then would be communicated to staff about what is appropriate and what is not. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. So we also need to define what's an acceptable location, right? As a given example, if you have a development program or a software development program where you're developing applications for, to sell your widgets or provide your widgets to your clients, and that particular database contains cardholder data, you do not want that particular cardholder data server, that database server, sitting out in your DMZ, right? That's just not a good place for it. So where we have spent all this money and all of this energy around maintaining a secure environment, you don't want somebody doing something that might inadvertently impact the security of how your organization is run. Okay, we need to maintain a list of those, of what is acceptable to bring in and use in the environment, right? You do not want people bringing in applications or installing things, installing hardware, installing applications that might somehow be, cause an impact to your cardholder data, right? So once again, we need to have a list of company-approved products. The next thing is you need to have a specific disconnection or policies that define the automatic disconnection when you're connected from remote. So if you have VPN'd into your network and you walk away from your desk at home, right, that VPN client should somehow disconnect you after a certain period of time. Now, the last one here is that you prohibit the move, copy, store of cardholder data onto a local machine when you're connected from remote. But of course, if it's required for business, it's okay. But as a general rule, you do not want to have people copying and moving and pulling data from this really secure environment onto their home PC that typically might not be managed as securely as the rest of your assets. Okay. So 12.3 is there's a lot of things that are going on here, right? And from an assessment perspective, we're looking for each of these particular items to have been met, all right? All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. Now, the next one here, 12.4, is really kind of the catch-all, and there's several things that when you look at the testing procedures that are associated with 12.4. But it's the security policies must be defined for all personnel, right, all users. And that's because we want to make sure that those individuals that are in your environment, that they know how to do their job securely. You know, as we talked about the receptionists, right, or you know, to explain to them, don't play Facebook, don't play Facebook games on these production servers. You know, security responsibilities around who's responsible for monitoring logs, who's responsible for, the incident response program. What are your responsibles as, as a management staff, as the executive staff? What are those things that you need to do and that you're responsible for doing to ensure that the daily care and feeding of your security program is in place, right? So while there's not a whole lot of words here for 12.4, believe me, there's a lot of work that really goes into this one, because it's anybody and everybody that's involved in your environment. They have some form of security responsibility. So we just need to define what those are. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. 12.5, okay. So it's not just enough to say, yeah, we have a security program in-house. It's that somebody actually has to be responsible, right, for the management of these things. And when we look at the testing procedures for 12.5.1, and I want to call it out specifically. I don't have it here on the screen, but I want to talk specifically about it. 12.5.1 says that you need to have somebody formally assigned, right, to the role of a CSO, Chief Security Officer. So it's either that you have a Chief Security Officer or other person that has security knowledge. Right, it's not just enough to say, yeah, we have our accountant person, right, the CFO, they're acting as the CSO. That's typically not acceptable unless the Chief Financial Officer actually really has the chops from a security perspective about how to manage the security of your environment, right? So somebody actually has to be assigned to own the security of your environment, right? And they have to start managing to those things. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. So the next one, 12.6, is we have to have a formal security awareness program. It does no good to develop all of these policies and all of these procedures and implement all of these things that we've been talking about through the last 11 requirements and then never educate users on the merits of them. So as an organization, you have to have a formal security awareness program. And there's a couple of requirements here. One is that everybody gets trained on security when they're hired, right? So when they come into the company, they need to go through the training program. Subsequent to that is that then annually, right, they need to go through the training again, right? And it's a refresh. Now, the other thing that we need to consider when we look at the requirements and around the information security training program is that we have to have multiple methods for the delivery of that. It's not just good enough to, put a poster on the wall and say, oh, there's our security awareness program. We looked at that if you have posters on the wall, as part of your program, that's great. But, we also look to see that you might have some face-to-face training available, that you might develop webinars, right? Things like if you're sitting in this particular training webinar that we've been doing here, right, this can be part of your security awareness program. So the delivery of the method and the methods that you use for disseminating that information are really important, and we need to make sure that it's not just a one and done. This needs to be, part of everything that your organization does, part of your how you do business, right? Security is something that you do. It's part of your culture, right? And so we expect to see that the training program looks to foster that. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. 12.7. 12.7 is pretty simple, right? 12.7 says that you need to screen potential employees for background checks, right? So you have to have background checks. Now, the thing about 12.7 is that there's a caveat to this. When you look at the kind of the preamble to it or the note in 12.7, this only applies, the background checks only apply to those individuals that are going to have access to more than one cardholder piece of data at a time. So individuals such as those that might, run your cash register or maybe call center agents where they only have access to one cardholder, one card number at a time, background checks are recommended for them, but it's not required, right? So 12.7 just says that you have to perform a background check. Now, it doesn't then state what you have to do with that, right? Once you've identified that there's a potential issue, right? What do you do with that, right? As an organization, how do you handle that? And that's really up to your risk management framework, right? What do you do with what's an acceptable level of deployments, right? It might be okay to hire somebody that's been convicted of a felony, right, in some situations and circumstances where it might not be in another. So really this boils down to is that you have a managed, right, expectation that there's going to be a background check done, and that it's then a managed decision as to the role that you're going to apply this person. Now, the other thing to consider is that if you as an organization have business units outside of the U.S., in the United States, we have the infrastructure to support these background checks, and it's pretty simple to go and get one nowadays. But if you have business units outside of the United States, as a given example, Brazil does not have the ability to run background checks, right? They just don't have the infrastructure to do those types of things. If you have a business unit in Germany, there's something called the Workers' Council that prevents your business from running a background check, right? And so you just need to be able to execute these within the confines of the local laws that you're operating in. So just be aware of that, right? So that there may be some limitations. And if there are limitations, your assessor should just ask you about those, why you're limited, and express those limitations within your report. All right, let's go ahead and look to move forward to requirement 12.8. Now, 12.8 is your vendor management stuff, right? This is the requirement that says that, when you onboard a new vendor, right, or a new service provider, right, you have to do some type of due diligence to making sure that those individuals and those organizations that you're going to be working with are not going to negatively impact your cardholder data, right? You have to maintain a list of who those service providers are. And as part of the contractual relationship that you have with them, there needs to be some type of agreement that says that those service providers are going to maintain the security of the cardholder data, or as it relates to, what they're doing for you, that they're going to be doing those things in a secure way, okay? So it's really important that you have that written contract so that it's agreed who's going to be doing what. You need to maintain a list of, of the services that they're providing for you, because that kind of flushes out some of the audit. You need to maintain that written agreement, and as part of that, you need to have the due diligence, perform some type of due diligence when engaging these service providers and making sure that not only that they can do these things in a secure way, but that they're not going to impact your environment at all, okay? Now, let's go ahead and go to 12.9. So as an organization looking at, we have these service providers, we have these vendors doing these things for us, and you need a contract or some type of agreement with those organizations that says that they're going to do things in a compliant way for you. 12.9 is the reciprocal of that. So 12.9 is specifically for service providers. If you are a service provider, you need to maintain some type of policy and procedure, and along with some type of template that says that you agree as an organization to maintain the security of those assets that you have in your possession, or can, perhaps otherwise impact the security of. What had happened within the industry is organizations, merchants and other service providers were going to their service providers and their vendors and saying, hey, you're considered a service provider. We need to get this contractual verbiage in place for our assessment. And these service providers were saying, yeah, I don't think so. You can go pound sand. We're not going to give that to you. And really what happened then is these organizations were really left, beholden to these organizations where these organizations weren't providing this to them. And so with version 3.1 of the PCI DSS, the council come out and said, okay, well, if you're a service provider and you are going to play in this space, you need to be able to have the capacity to, when your clients come to you, to provide this, provide this language for them when they come to you and ask you for that. What that language really states is really, in terms of what's in the template, is really kind of insignificant, because chances are, that information is going to get changed quite a bit, but by the time that it actually gets implemented. But 12.8 is outwardly looking, right, where you're looking at your service providers, and 12.9 is if you're a service provider looking back at the organizations that you look to service, right? So if you're servicing clients and they have not come to you for this, know that they will likely be coming to you and asking you at some point for that contractual obligation or that memo or something that where you're acknowledging you're going to maintain the security. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to 12.10. Now, there's a whole lot of information when you look at 12.10. There's a whole lot of things going on here, right? And this was about implementing an incident response plan. Now, the purpose of an incident response plan is to ensure that you minimize the impact to your environment should somebody interact with some assets in an unauthorized way. So in order to help to minimize that, we need to specifically define the roles and responsibilities, right, of what is it that people do, right, in terms of within your organization. If there is an incident, what do you do to address those things, right? Who's responsible for what? We need the specific procedures that define how you go about, implementing your incident response, okay? We need to define business continuity and recovery procedures, right? And for this particular bullet point, we're not just so much talking about, being able to get up and running again to resell your widgets. We're really talking about reconstituting the security of your environment, right? Recovering the security of what it is that failed in the first place, okay? We have data backup procedures, right, processes. Understand that if you were breached, there's likely going to be a forensics investigation. We want to make sure that the integrity of that environment is maintained in some capacity so that forensics can be performed so we can find out really what happened, right? If you were breached, you have reporting responsibilities. You have reporting responsibilities to the card brands if you've been breached. And depending on where you're operating, right, and who your customers are, you might have legal obligations to disclose that you've been breached, or that there's been a breach of your data. Okay. Now, as part of this, you need to have a test plan in place that addresses, all of your program as a whole, right? So it's the training. You need to train the individuals. You need to test your plan to making sure that your plan will function, right, in the event that something's occurred. You'll often hear me, when I talk about this, you'll often hear me make the statement is the last thing that you want to happen, during a breach or during an incident is people standing around and looking at each other and saying, oh my gosh, what do we do now, right? You should never be in a situation where that occurs. Okay. So we need to, as part of that testing annually, right, we need to provide this specific incident response training to those individuals as part of the test plan. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. We need to also include, as part of your incident response plan, we need to make sure that we're monitoring, right? We have firewalls, we have routers, we have IDS, we have IPS, we have, malware, we have all of these things that we're collecting data from. So your incident response plan needs to call out the need to be monitoring of those things and what to do in the event that something happens. What do we do when, if Johnny logs in, 55 times in 3 seconds at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? That might be considered an incident. What do you do with those things? And then lastly, as part of this, is that we need to have a postmortem, right? And that postmortem is going to really, it's not meant as a means to talk about, well, Johnny should have done this and Betty didn't do that well. Well, Tommy did really great. That's not what the intent of this is. The intent behind the postmortem is to sit around and identify what is a company. Remember, this is a management's exercise. What did we do well, right? What functioned well? What didn't go so well? What could we do better? So that the organization can improve their processes and improve the program, and to minimize the impact, right, of a breach. Okay, so that's really kind of what we're talking about when we look at these specific bullet points. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. All right. So as a conclusion to requirement 12, you need to understand that the PCI DSS is not just a technology standard, right? It really does cover people, processes, and technologies. And it's expected that you develop a policy program and a procedures program that address those things, okay? Understand that a policy is not just the piece of paper that it's written on, right? The piece of paper is just the medium that's used for communication. The policy is an executive level edict, if you would, that comes down from the executive board or the executive or their delegates that defines this is, as a company, this is how we want to run our business, right? So that's what the policies are. Now, understand that you need to ensure that when you implement these policies and procedures, it's not just enough to say, here's a policy. You need to make sure that your policies and that your procedures are effective, right, and that they're functioning as you've designed them. If your policies aren't functioning, you don't have a policy, right? You have guidance, right? You have a guideline. So ensure that when you implement and institute these things, that you have programs in place to ensure the efficacy of all of these things that management is asking to be done. All right. So let's go ahead and go to our last slide here. So I'm going to open up for, thank you first of all for everybody for attending. I'd like to open up for if there's any questions that anybody has. So I'll turn it back over to Sarah for a few moments. Sarah, did we have any questions that we needed to, that we had come through?
I do not see any at this time, but if you want to go on and start talking about what's coming up for our PCI series, and I'll give people another opportunity to answer any questions really quick while you do that.
Right. So here on the screen is my name is Jeff Wilder, and there is my desk phone number and my email address. If you have any questions that that you'd like to talk about, as it relates to anything PCI, I love this industry. I mean, as macabre and as odd and demented as that might sound, I absolutely love doing this. So I would love to hear your, take a call from you to help you identify those things. So the next series, the PCI DSS, we're going to start kind of moving into PCI DSS requirement or version 3.2. We've only got a couple of weeks left where we can still continue to use 3.1. So the next version of this webinar, we're going to start talking about the appendixes. There's actually 2 appendixes. There's one appendix that's for a shared hosted service provider. That's an awful mouthful. So that there's not a lot going on there. So I might, what I might do is we'll be definitely talking about that, but I might include some other topics in there as well. But subsequent to that, we're going to spend some time then, and there's a new appendix for version 3.2. It's called a designated entity, and it's going to be worth your time if you have the hour to spend with me to kind of talk through what is a designated entity, how do you become a designated entity, and what that means to you as an organization. So that's going to be the next couple of webinars that as we move forward here. And then when we're done with that, we're likely to go back and start to discuss some of the PCI requirements that are specific and new to requirement 3.2. Well, we talked about the deltas some time ago of the differences between version 3.1 and 3.2. We didn't necessarily go into details, right? So that's going to kind of be the progression of the new webinars coming up. We really look forward to you being on them and being part of that. So once again, please feel free to give me a call or drop me an email if you need to. And Sarah, did we have any additional questions come in?
No, we did not.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for spending part of their afternoon with me. I'm giving you 15 minutes of your day back. And Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone again, and be on the lookout. Probably sometime tomorrow afternoon we'll be sending out the copy of the slide deck from today as well as the link to the recording. And then keep an eye on your inbox for invitations to the next part of the series. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you, Jeff.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Bye.